My guests today on Creative Inspired Happy are Jennifer Acker and Emily Everett, the editor-in-chief and managing editor of literary magazine The Common, which is celebrating its 15th anniversary. Jennifer and Emily are also both accomplished novelists. Today, we talk about what an editor at a literary magazine does, how they find submissions and how they choose what to publish at The Common, what makes a great writing mentor, the differences in writing short fiction and nonfiction versus longer form books, advice for aspiring writers on how to decide what to write and the shape of your career, advice for writers on the eve of their book's publication, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with incredibly successful authors and others in the book world to help you build a fulfilling career and live a more creative, inspired, and happy life. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get publishing insights, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Emily. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, we're great. It's like 60 degrees and sunny outside, and that feels amazing.
Well, that's amazing because, sometimes spring doesn't come when we want it to come, but that timing works out great with the time change and everything. So I'm thrilled to have both of you on today because you both are at The Common, which is a literary publication, a literary organization. And I want to talk a little bit about that and writing short fiction, but you're both also novelists as well. And so I think we're going to have a great time delving into short fiction versus long form fiction. But first, The Common, tell me a little bit about that, Jennifer, because you are the founder, and I know that you are celebrating the 15th anniversary this year.
Yeah, the 15th anniversary is a big milestone. It feels like an increasingly long time the longer I'm in this field and the more magazines I see fold along the way. And that's not for a lack of trying on anybody's part. Everyone is in this business for the love of it. It's just hard to maintain financially, and sort of the stars have to align in order to be able to make it this long. But the whole founding principle of the magazine is this idea of sense of place, and I think that that's really important to me, and I think to Emily too. And so we both come from these very rural New England backgrounds, and where the environment that you grow up in really makes a difference. They're small towns; they really dictate what your life is like. Who you know, what you see every day, the kinds of relationships that you have with nature and with neighbors. And so that all of that was on my mind, those kinds of relationships, when I started thinking about starting a literary magazine and in particular, The Common. And the name The Common brings us back to that idea of the sense of place. It's, the name comes from the town common, like a New England town common, and every culture and country and community has some version of that, has some gathering place. It's the Zocalo, it's the Piazza, it's the Central Square, or wherever you go. And so the magazine is really meant to be a community builder, as well as a place to platform writers and grow careers.
Oh, I love it. Emily, I would love to hear about how you came to work at The Common, because I know that you did an undergrad and a master's in literature, but you hadn't really been writing, right? At that time where you had just been starting to write short fiction. So how did you end up finding your way there as a writer, but then also as an editor?
Yeah, I had barely started writing. I was like working on my first short story when I started work at The Common. Um, yeah, I was very lucky. I started about 9 years ago. So it was this time where Jenna has been growing The Common for so many years. It started out as a very small thing, mostly at Amherst College. I mean, we're based at Amherst College, but mostly just Amherst College students as employees. And so I was the first non-Amherst College student to be hired, which is an honor. I went to Smith College, so not far, but yeah, and I had started writing. I had really felt at that time, I've never done an MFA. I had my degrees are in literature, like you said. And at that time, it was a time where everybody seemed to have MFAs, and it was very important to get your MFA. And I really felt like I wasn't a real writer because I hadn't done that type of program. I hadn't had that like stamp of approval. And I really feel like my early years at the Common were really learning to like grow in the confidence of like trusting my taste and my growing abilities, which were not great at first. And trusting that you can really kind of make your own MFA if you're a good student of literature, if you're really reading a lot, if you're thinking thoughtfully about what you're reading. And a lot of that I learned from Jen, from learning how to edit fiction, learning how to edit prose for the magazine, and just interacting with so many writers through the magazine as well, working on other people's stories, and really learning what a story needs and what fiction needs to really grab people, but also to feel satisfying at the end, which I think is sort of a tricky balance. Yeah, and I mean, since then I've just written more and more every year, and I started out writing more short stuff, and I'm not sure I was ever very good at short stories, but I did okay with flash fiction. I really like flash fiction if I'm writing short stuff. I think it's really fun, like a very playful form. And then, but my natural form has always been the novel, and I feel like that's mostly what I read, and that's mostly what I naturally write toward. And so it's been fun working on that while still working on short things at the Common. Yeah.
How do you feel that being an editor has helped you as a writer or vice versa?
Um, it's so big it's hard to even quantify or like give specific examples of, but I mean, one of the easiest things is just that when I read great work for the Common, it's very inspiring, so it just kind of gets those creative juices flowing, which I'm sure lots of writers can kind of fill up that cup by reading short story collections or reading novels or something like that, or going to readings. But for me, it's very much reading these pieces that come through the submissions pile or something like that, and seeing in some cases those stories that just like knock your socks off and don't need anything and they're perfect, and we can't wait to publish them. But what we often encounter is pieces that are really close and need some work, or maybe they need an adjustment to the ending, or a little bit of deepening and so, or something like that. And I think with Jen's help, I've sort of learned how to bring those pieces to a much nicer final form, like something that feels really satisfying. And I think that has definitely been a good lesson for me as a writer too. And I think it's funny. I don't think that I know what it takes to write a good short story, because I feel like it's such an open-ended form. I feel like there's so many different kinds of good short stories. And we publish such a wide range of them. Some of them are really kind of avant-garde and strange. Some of them are very traditional. And I think I've just sort of learned that you have to kind of meet a piece where it's at and just be like, this might not be my natural taste, but I think it's working at what it's trying to do. Which is really different than working on your own writing, because you're always trying to figure out like what you want to do, which is very different. Um, but I think most of it is just learning to put in the time and all the drafts, and to accept edits from other people, which can be hard for some writers. Was never hard for me, because I have also worked as an editor, so I know that like there's almost nothing as helpful as another person's fresh eyes on your piece. And ideally you find an editor who understands your vision and isn't trying to change things fundamentally. But being open to an editor relationship is, I think, one of the most important things a writer can do, and luckily for me that wasn't too hard.
And Jen, when you started the Common, I'm just curious, what kinds of pieces were you looking for back then, 15 years ago? And has it changed? What has the evolution of the Common been, and what are you looking for now from writers?
hmm I think I tend to be, if left to my own devices, a fairly traditional reader. And so I certainly think that that's more what I was looking for in the beginning, or what I thought I was looking for. And one of the wonderful things that has happened over the years is coming into contact with other editors at the magazine, like Emily, like some of our other colleagues, who really pushed me to, beyond my comfort zone a little bit, and to think about other kinds of pieces and the value that they have. And the sort of that, as Emily was saying, the short story form is kind of infinite and its variations, and what is good or what works. And that has really been a pleasure, I think, to be able to say, well, the old me might not have gravitated exactly towards this kind of story, but I've grown as an editor, and as a reader, and now I can appreciate a much wider diversity of forms, of styles, of backgrounds. Um, and in part, that has also come from all of the international work that we publish. The Common publishes a lot of works in translation, and in particular, a lot of Arabic literature in translation. And so just being exposed to those other forms and realizing that, the American short story is not the only way, or the American short story that's sort of typically taught in MFA programs. And I know that's changed a lot in the last 20 years or so. But just being exposed to all different kinds of traditions and different kinds of writers has been really exciting and rewarding.
And this is actually a really interesting point that you talked about works in translation. I'm curious how that works. How do you receive submissions internationally? And I'd also like to talk about domestically how you receive submissions, but maybe, yeah, why don't you touch about on that in general? How does the Common get submissions? How do writers submit to you, and what is your process for choosing what you publish? Emily, do you want to take that?
Sure. When I first started at the Common, was in charge of managing our submissions. Now we have a literary editorial fellow who does more of the submission management. But people can send us work. Let's see, March through June we're open, and then we're open again September through December. So we have sort of these 3-month submission periods.
Unless you're a subscriber, I just have to say, and then you can submit year round.
That's true. Subscribers can submit to us year round. That's a perk. And they can submit up to 10,000 words, which in the world of literary magazines is pretty long. I think a lot of magazines only take up to like 5,000, and sometimes we do publish those very long pieces. And yeah, we do fiction, nonfiction. People can send 5 poems at once. We also have a really cool online column we call Dispatches, which is nonfiction, either verse or prose, very policey, very transporting, very short pieces. So it can almost feel like an essay that doesn't have to have like a big point. It can mostly be just about experiencing a place that you haven't visited through the author's writing. And we publish a lot of those. And yeah, people can submit to us, and we try to read as fast as we can. Sometimes it takes us a long time. Our process is that we have volunteer readers who read first, and they leave feedback, and then an editor goes in and makes a decision on the piece. And so that because they're so thoroughly read, it means it can take a while. But it's really helpful for us as editors because, if I read something one day and I'm not really sure I like it, but the readers loved it, I might still send it to Jen just to make sure I'm not missing it or, reading it on a bad day or something like that. So yeah, that's usually our process. We get almost all the work that we publish through submissions. We do publish a few things that we get from agents or people we solicit or something like that, but it's almost all submissions. And as I was sort of mentioning before, we do a ton of editing with pieces. So a few pieces we accept and just go into the magazine with just some light copy editing, but most pieces get what we call a revise and resubmit. So we send them an email with our thoughts on what the piece might need to be strengthened. And then if the author's interested in making those edits, then we might do, 4, 5, 6, 10 rounds of revisions with them. Jen's worked on pieces that, went on for a year and had big changes, and, they just go on to be much fuller pieces. And I think it's a very educational process for us as editors and also for the authors. And they're usually very appreciative of the edits, which has been a good lesson for me, because I think I always feel bad giving people edits. I'm like, oh no, I don't want you to think that what you did was wrong. But Jen has really showed me that authors, generally speaking, are just glad that someone is engaging so deeply with their work, and that they're being read very thoroughly and carefully. And now that I have been edited as a writer, I can say that's totally true. When you feel like someone's taking the time to give you notes, it's not nothing.
Yeah, I've also heard anecdotes about authors who, are edited well when they're earlier in their career. But then as they become famous, they stop being edited because whether through, laziness, because people are thinking, oh, the book's going to sell anyway, or because, you don't want to step on their egos, or, whatever else reason. And actually their work suffers for it. And so there are some authors who will then think they'll know my editor's not going to edit me. So I will go and find other people to actually do the work, because there's so much value in having another set of eyes, having somebody who understands what the potential is of your work, and helping you get it there. So Jen, I have a question for you, because as editor-in-chief, I imagine you wear a lot of different hats. And one question I have is, how do you decide what the mix is of pieces that go into a publication? So like, if you're going to publish this magazine, this issue, is that your job to say, okay, we have this many poems, or we have to balance the subject matter?
At this point, we pretty much have a template for the print issues in terms of the the percentage of the magazine that is prose and poetry. And so we publish multiple genres in print. We have short fiction and nonfiction and poetry. And that's pretty much it. Like those are the genres for the print magazine, and art. We always have an image portfolio in the magazine. And then we have defined columns online, and those published with a regular frequency. So things are pretty much defined, like the dispatches, published every so often, the book reviews published every so often, the interviews. And so that is sort of part of our schedule. Of course, things change and you have to be flexible. And, one issue we devoted entirely to Arabic short fiction. But that would be unusual to do something, to do an issue that was all fiction, for example. And so, yeah, we really tried to keep in mind our readers and provide things that we think they're going to like, but also push the envelope a little bit and try to introduce things that they wouldn't encounter otherwise. And that's where a lot of the translated literature comes in.
Yeah, so actually, let's follow up on that translated literature because I forgot I dropped that topic earlier. How do you get those submissions? And then who works on the translations? And how do you know if it's a language that you don't speak or read? How do you know what is the quality submission? So Jen, I'd love if you address that.
Yeah, so the translated literature comes to us a couple of different ways. One is through, we have a particular portal in Submittable where you can submit translations. So if you're a translator and you're looking to submit work, it will be easy for you to know where to submit it if you're submitting to the Common. And that column is open to multiple genres. And there's an editor for that column, Stephanie, and she she reads and reviews everything that comes in, and for the most part, that's for the website, for the Common Online pieces that we publish there. The works in translation that appear in print usually are a result of a special portfolio that we're doing, and we've done a lot of them. That's sort of one of our trademarks, is that usually once a year, we have 2 print issues a year, and often one of those issues, sometimes 2, are honing in on a particular place or a particular region. And so we did a portfolio of writing from Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and so all of those pieces, almost all of them, were translated. And though in that case, because I can read Spanish, then that was an easier entry, so that I sort of could choose pieces from in their original language, and then we could decide on translation. That is not the case for Arabic. I do not read Arabic. I'm not able to choose those pieces, and so we have a longstanding colleague and a friend who's a Jordanian writer named Hisham Bustani, and he selects the pieces in Arabic, and then we work together after they've been translated on editing them. And that's a very intensive collaborative process that we've been doing for several years. And then, of course, over time, I've gotten to know a lot of translators, so then they send me pieces that are not necessarily for a portfolio or for a particular column, but just because they know that the Common is interested in international literature and works written in other languages. And so those just come to us as part of the normal channel.
Oh, fantastic. Emily, I would love to hear a little bit about mentorship, because I know that you mentioned at the top of the episode and even before we started recording how you came to the Common and you learned so much from Jennifer, both as an editor and as a writer. And so I would love if you could share some of your experiences on how you felt like you kind of grew up as a writer and an editor through what Jennifer has taught you and your work at the Common.
Yeah, I feel like I've really had to learn by doing, because as I said, I didn't have an MFA, and I felt that I didn't maybe have all the information that everyone else had about how to edit people or how to give feedback and that kind of thing. And so I really learned by watching Jen do it. If she was sending edits back to someone, I might be CC'd on the email and see the language she uses. Giving feedback is really an art. And I can say this since I've both given it and received it. You want to say things nicely enough that they can be received without defensiveness and causing harm or hurt. But also clear enough that that the changes get made. Sometimes writers, I'm definitely guilty of this, are sort of reluctant to make big changes. We just change a couple words and then we're like, there, I fixed it. And so you do want to make sure that you're clear and firm enough that it's clear that what you're looking for might be more of a, more of a robust change than that. And I really did learn that just from watching Jen do it, or sometimes we would even be working on the same document, with track changes, two people can give edits on the same piece, and I can see her comments and respond to them. And, working with some of my other colleagues over the years, if they raise a question in a comment, I might have an idea I think might help the writer fix that, so we can sort of collaborate in that way. So I really feel like it was just, learning by doing. Really, sometimes when I was in my early days of writing, when I first started at the Common, I felt like I knew a great story when I read it, but I didn't necessarily know what my stories needed to be great. And I definitely showed Jen stories, and she would give me edits and thoughts about what they needed to be stronger. And it was so helpful to get those notes from someone who I knew, because what I was mostly getting, which most writers are used to, is tons of form rejections from lit mags, which, it's a necessary part of the process. But when you're trying to figure out what's wrong with a piece, a form rejection is not super helpful. And once you get a certain quorum of them, then it's just discouraging. So having someone I could go to who I knew, or I already knew had a sharp editorial eye, and who would also give me, shoot straight with me, and didn't really have a horse in the race. The way, I love getting feedback from my friends as well, but it's like, friend feedback is different.
Okay, so oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
You have a novel, All That Life Can Afford, that's coming out really soon. And so Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast, we're also an online community of writers, which is why I love the idea of the Common, creating a common space, a gathering place for writers. And so this question is for Emily from Katrina D. And she wanted to know if there was anything that Jen did or said specifically that helped encourage you to write the novel, or helped you see your story so that you could actually move forward and write this whole long form piece.
Yeah, honestly, I think I would say the most, Jen has given me a million bits of great advice over the years, but I think the biggest thing she did was just be a really great example of what the writing life looks like when you're committed to it, but you also have a day job. Because I think, for a lot of us writers, that's how it goes. And um, I'm lucky in that I love my day job, but there is this balance where a lot of your energy is going towards something else, but you have this book that you really want to work on. And Jen worked for many, many years on her first novel, and really was very committed to it. And it went through a lot of different phases. And, then I remember when it was out on submission with her agent, and then, notes from editors. And so I got to really kind of watch all of those things and see her dedication to it. And also just see, Jen and I are good now. Like, we'll give each other a week off to work on writing, when things are slow, certain times of the year, since we're out of college. And I think to see, that kind of commitment to a private, or personal, it's a different kind of work. It feels like you have two jobs. It feels like you have your editorial job, and then your job writing a novel. And I think the more you treat it like that, the better. And I think Jen, the seriousness with which she's always treated her writing, but also being able to go with the flow, the rejection, the ups and downs, how long it takes to get a novel published, And so I'm really just very glad that I got to see Jen work through all those things, so that when it came time for me, I knew it wouldn't be all sunshine and roses, and that it would take a while, and that, that there's certain ways you have to manage it so you don't get burnt out or too frustrated and that kind of thing. And I definitely, I'm glad that the Common sort of fills up my cup again so that I don't get too burnt out. Yeah.
Jen, as someone who has had so much experience in the literary space, do you actively feel like you have responsibility towards mentoring young people or younger writers? And if you do, what do you think are good qualities in mentorship, or what do you try to do?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And it's interesting to hear, Emily talk about our experience together, because we've been working together for so long now and have been writers in the trenches for so long. They're like, she's mentoring me now. I mean, this is like, honestly, so I'm like, well, so what do I do about this? Like, what, can you give me some advice? And
Sure.
so that's been really wonderful, as I think to have that kind of collegial environment, I think is pretty special. But to your question, I think mentors are so important, and are one of the most fulfilling relationships that you can have. And I think you don't always realize when you're in a mentor relationship. Like, Emily and I work with all these Amherst College students, these brilliant, creative, hardworking students. And, we're their bosses, like that. That's sort of how it works. Like, we ask them to do things. They, they do things for us. They get paid. Like, it's a work relationship. But, we are also mentors, in a way. And, we work with them on their writing. Our students have writing projects that they work on every summer, and I edit those and go several rounds with the students there. That would probably be the most like classic mentorship role. But also, I like to think that we are, yeah, setting good examples as people, as literary professionals, as literary citizens, as writers, and often are pretty open and honest about our work. Like, writing is really hard. It requires a lot of revision. It requires a community. All of these things. And I think that just sort of, and because they are in this professional magazine environment, they're absorbing a lot. And so just putting them in the room for editorial discussions and the other kinds of decision making that happens at the Common, I think is a valuable experience. You have to ask them, but I know that I have learned so much, and from my bosses in writing and editing jobs that I've had. And so that kind of, paying it forward, it's really, it's what you have in the writing community, because you can't guarantee that the writing is going to go well, or that you're going to be published well, or that, anything that you do creatively is going to be a commercial success, or, and so that the work itself, the creative work itself, whether that's writing or editing, and the community that you form, those are the things that really matter and that you have at the end of the day.
And I know that with the Common, you're working a lot with short fiction, but then you yourself, you have written a novel, The Limits of the World. You've also written a memoir. What are the differences that you've experienced as a writer from the writing side between the different forms?
Yeah, it's a good question. I love writing nonfiction. I write a lot of personal essays, and that's where the memoir came from. I find it easier to be sort of honest and straightforward in nonfiction than I do in fiction. And I guess maybe there seems like there are obvious reasons for that, but I often have trouble in my fiction trying to make it as like emotionally explicit, or put the emotions on the page in the same way. That I find that easier to do in nonfiction, where it just seems like, well, I'm just going to have to come out and say it. Um, and I sort of, like Emily was saying, I really struggle with short fiction. As a writer, it's ironic that we're editors of short fiction and both really struggle with the form. But I think that gives us a lot of empathy for our writers. Um, but I think, as a writer, the short fiction is just it's such a chameleon. Like, I feel like it can really change so much. And I'm still, I'm still learning how to write short stories. I mean, I'm still learning how to write novels too, so it's not like I've got that one down. Um, but I think it's wonderful to be a bird's eye, to have a bird's eye view on lots of authors, different creative processes. It is inspiring, as Emily said, and it also, yeah, it's eye opening, and it shows you all the different ways that that things can be done.
Emily, I would love to hear about your novel. Speaking of long form and loving to write, longer works, tell us a little bit about your upcoming book and then how you were inspired to write it.
Sure. My book is called All That Life Can Afford. It comes out on April 1st, so very soon. Um, and the title comes from this famous quote about London by Samuel Johnson. He said, um, when a man is tired of London, he's tired of life, for there is in London all that life can afford. He was sort of encouraging his friend to move to London and that he would never be bored there. And it just seemed perfect because what I had been thinking about, this was during the pandemic, and I was, stuck at home like everyone else and thinking about London, which is a place where I lived for 4 years, I think. Yeah, 4 years. In my early 20s, I went there for grad school and then I worked for a couple of years. And it was such a beautiful place. And I was so broke there. I was so poor. And I grew up working class. And so I wasn't, surprised to be paycheck to paycheck, but it's a very expensive city. And I was tutoring at the time, teaching SAT prep classes and tutoring students for the SAT. And they were all very wealthy families because in England, going to college is very inexpensive. So if you want to go to college in the US and you're taking the SAT, you're definitely a wealthy person. And so I was sort of sliding along these very glamorous lives, beautiful homes. London is a place, New York is less like this now, but London is really a place where you even say the name of certain neighborhoods and it's like, oh, those people make a certain amount of money. And then there's other neighborhoods that are not as nice and they can be really close together. And so I really felt like I was sort of passing in between those worlds all the time. And it really made me think a lot about class and privilege and those kind of things. And so I really thought it would be a wonderful, fun thing to write a book about because I think it could be really fun and escapist in the way that we love to read about beautiful lives, Gatsby, these beautiful parties, these glamorous clothes, there's like a real escapism in that, and it can be so fun. But I also knew that the main character would probably be a little bit like me and that she would be an outsider in that world and that she would be from a working class background and maybe have some wounds that she's trying to heal or some, things that she's trying to hide from these people around her in her efforts to belong. Moving to London was wonderful and I loved it. But I recently found my diaries from that time and I was so scared. I was so nervous. I wasn't sure I fit in. I constantly felt like I was being perceived, which is, not something I was used to. I grew up in the same place. I hadn't really, I never felt like I was constantly being judged, and you move to a new place and everyone's just trying to figure out who you are and what you're about and where you belong. And so it's really sort of about that time in your life. And also just, I think, that time in your early 20s, you're trying to figure out the world, you're trying to figure out where you belong in it, how you want to be in it. And so the main character, Anna, is sort of, I think, making a lot of mistakes that I wouldn't have let myself make because I'm such a control freak. And it was really fun to just sort of set her loose on London, and they go to Lisbon and they go to Saint-Tropez and just sort of go to all these beautiful places that I went when I was there. But to have her really have some misadventures was really fun.
I love that. Okay, we're running out of time, so I want to end with advice from both of you. So, Emily, I would love for you to give some advice to aspiring writers based on where you are now in your career, like what you've learned from your past writing to having this novel come out. And then, Jen, I will then come to you to ask the last question, which is, what advice do you have for Emily or any writers who are on the brink of having their book come out based on your experience of having books published? So, Emily, let's go to you first.
Okay, I wonder if this advice will be controversial, but I'm a very results-oriented person. I'm not one of those writers who's like in love with the everyday process of writing. I'm really trying to write something that I'm going to love the end result of. And I always knew that I wanted to publish in a certain way. And I really like fiction that I feel like rides the line between commercial and literary. So, what they call it, market fiction, book club fiction, that kind of thing. And I think that's really my sweet spot. And so I knew that I wanted to write something that would end up in that space. And so I didn't treat it too preciously, like I was making some careful work of art that no one in the history of the world had ever envisioned before. Like one of the things that makes more commercial fiction, appealing to people is that it follows certain forms, or there's like a structure. Some things can feel expected, and sometimes that can feel sort of rote and boring or tropey, but sometimes it feels really satisfying and it can have this sort of nice emotional arc. And I think it's worth considering what kind of project you really want to have at the end and what kind of career you want to have and where you want your books to land. And I think if you are trying to make something that's completely, so artistic that people have trouble understanding it. I've read pieces that are so beautifully written, but people can't understand what's basically happening in them. And there's that's hard to find a market for. And I think that I was more interested in making something that I knew people would want to read, because as a writer, I think my greatest interest is in just being part of the reading world, being part of this world that I love to be in. I love to read. I wanted to make a book that other people would love to read. I wasn't trying to, reinvent the wheel or anything like that. And I wanted to write something fun that also had a message and some heart and some guts. And I think I knew that going in, and that really helped me make decisions while I was writing. And I think some people are just sort of waiting to see what might happen to their characters. And I'm too much of a control freak again to do that.
I love it. Okay, and Jen, what is your advice for Emily as she embarks out on this world with her novel?
I don't think Emily needs my advice, but I would. I think just enjoy it. I think that you only publish a novel every few years if you're lucky. And, it's a really special experience to be, it's that moment where everyone looks at you as a writer, and so we all have multiple identities in our lives. And that's the moment where you really get to celebrate your creative side, and where people are coming to book events to see you and to see what you've written and to celebrate this, this work that you've put out into the world. So it can be so easy to get swept up in the anxiety of, is this getting reviewed well? How many copies am I selling? Am I selling more than X person? Or like and all of that is inevitable. We all have it, and it's just the demons that come with being an artist. But I think as much as you can, to remind yourself in all of the moments, like, this was really happening, and this was really cool, and this is why, this sense of satisfaction and this recognition, and this is such an opportunity to be able to, to share your work. And maybe that all sounds quite glib and sunshiny, but it's, it's what we have.
No, I think it's perfect. I always think that, as both of you said, we come to writing because we love it, right? And so I think that when your writing goes out in the world, you should also be celebrating this beautiful thing that you've made, and you deserve that moment, and I love this. So thank you both so much for being here. This was really fun. I will leave in the episode notes information for anyone who's interested in submitting to the Common or picking up copies of your latest novels. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.